I was 5 years old when my mother told me she was taking me out for ice cream. I held her hand the whole way, swinging it like any little girl would. But when we reached the tall black gate of the foster center, she let go, and she never looked back. They said I was cursed, that the large birthmark on my face was a sign, a warning from the universe. Every tragedy that happened in our family, my father's job loss, my grandmother's fall, my baby brother's death, they blamed it all on me. I was just a child. But to them, I was the reason their lives fell apart. So they threw me away like trash and never spoke of me again. For 20 years, I lived with that shame burned into my skin literally. I never looked people in the eye. I never let a boy get close. I thought if I stayed invisible, the world might not hurt so much. But pain has a way of sharpening people. And while they forgot me, I built a life. I studied harder than anyone, cried harder than anyone, and eventually, I became someone no one could ignore. I paid for my own treatment overseas. The birthmark is gone now. So is the little girl they left behind. But I remembered them. And when I saw them again bankrupt, desperate, I helped them. Secretly, I gave them a lifeline, because some part of me still hoped they had hearts. But when they insulted me to my face again without knowing who I was, I took everything back, including their home. Oh, you want to talk about curses? Let me tell you what a curse really looks like. Subscribe for more true stories of betrayal, revenge, and justice. Because sometimes, the quietest child becomes the loudest storm. When I was born, the first thing my mother did was scream, not out of joy, not out of relief, but out of horror. The nurses tried to calm her down, told her it was just a birthmark, a port wine stain, medical and harmless. But to my family, it wasn't harmless. It was a sign, a warning, a stain on their so-called perfect life. The mark covered the left side of my face, from my cheekbone down to the corner of my lips, deep red, bold, unmissable, and in their eyes, unforgivable. As a baby, I didn't know any of this, but by the time I could walk, I could feel it the way my mother flinched when I ran toward her, the way my father avoided eye contact, the way my grandmother crossed herself every time I entered a room, whispering prayers under her breath like I was some kind of demon. By age 4, I had already stopped looking in mirrors. By age 5, I had stopped expecting hugs. I remember going to preschool with my face turned away. The other kids stared, pointed. Some even cried when they saw me. One girl screamed, "She's bleeding, I wasn't." But in their minds, my face looked like a wound. No one wanted to sit next to me. No one wanted to share crayons or toys. Teachers tried to be kind, but even they hesitated. I could see it the way they smiled with pity, not warmth. At home, things were worse. When the family dog died suddenly, my father said, "It's her. That girl's cursed." When the roof collapsed during a thunderstorm, my uncle joked, "She brought the wrath of God." It wasn't funny, but they laughed anyway. One night, I heard my parents arguing behind a closed door. My mother's voice broke into sobs. She was born under a blood moon. I knew something was wrong. I felt it. My father growled, "She's tearing this family apart." Then came the words that still haunt me. "We should have never kept her." From that night on, I stopped speaking unless spoken to. I started shrinking into myself, curling inward like a leaf burning under the sun. I cried into my pillow at night, silently, always silently. I didn't want to give them another reason to hate me. I stopped asking for bedtime stories. I stopped asking to be held. I started pretending I wasn't there. and somehow that seemed to make them happier. But I was still a child. I still hoped. So on the day my mother said she was taking me out for ice cream, I lit up inside. I remember clapping my hands. I remember picking out my favorite pink sandals. I remember thinking, maybe this is the start of something new. Maybe she's finally ready to love me. She held my hand. We walked down the street. We passed the bakery, the ice cream shop, but we kept walking until we stopped in front of a tall black gate, a gray building with cracked walls and a faded sign. "Just wait here," she said softly. "I'll be back in 5 minutes." I nodded, smiling. I waited, and waited, and waited. The sun went down, the lights came on, but she never came back. A woman from the foster center opened the door and asked me who I was. "My mom's coming back," I whispered. But she didn't. I was 5 years old, and I had just been abandoned. Not because I did something wrong, not because they couldn't afford me, but because I was born with a mark they couldn't bear to look at. I wasn't Leona, their daughter. I was a curse, a stain, an inconvenience. And from that moment on, I belonged to no one. The foster home was cold, not just in temperature, but in spirit. The walls were lined with crayon scribbles and peeling paint, and the air always smelled like cheap soap and leftover pasta. But what I remember most was the silence. Not peaceful silence, the kind that suffocates you. The kind that makes you feel like you're already halfway gone. No one asked me why I was there. No one ever does in places like that. You just show up one day, and the world moves on without question. I slept in the corner bed, by the broken window, at night. The wind would rattle the glass and sneak through the cracks, brushing against my skin like a ghost. I used to imagine it was my mother coming back. Just one more time, just to say sorry. But morning always came, and she never did. The other kids weren't cruel, not at first. They were just curious. They asked questions, stared at my face, whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. One boy called me witch girl. Another said I looked like I got attacked by a bear. I laughed with them at first. I thought if I played along, maybe they'd stop. But they didn't. Eventually, I stopped laughing. I stopped talking altogether. By the time I turned 10, I was the quiet girl who sat in the back of the class, head down, hair draped over one side of her face. I made sure my birthmark was always hidden. I wore hoodies even in the summer, pulled the strings tight so no one could see. I learned to be invisible. It was safer that way. I started reading. A lot. Books became my only friends. They never stared, never flinched, never asked questions. I devoured everything I could: novels, biographies, textbooks, anything that could take me somewhere else. I studied harder than anyone. Not because I wanted praise. I didn't believe I deserved any. But because I needed a way out. I believed deep down that if I became valuable enough, smart enough, successful enough, maybe someday the world would stop seeing the mark and start seeing me. Still, the damage was done. I never went to dances, never had a birthday party, never kissed a boy. I remember once when I was 13, a new boy came to our school and sat next to me in the library. He had kind eyes and didn't look away when I turned my face. He asked me what I was reading. I felt my heart flutter, the tiniest seed of hope. But then I heard one of the girls whisper behind him, "Poor guy doesn't know she's cursed." And just like that, I shut the door again. Love wasn't for girls like me. Attention wasn't safe. I learned to live in the shadows to survive with my head down, my mouth shut, and my heart locked tight. But somewhere in that darkness, something else began to grow, not anger, not yet, but purpose. I wanted more than survival. I wanted to become something they couldn't ignore. So I worked. I worked when others played. I studied when others slept. I earned scholarships, awards, top marks in every subject. I taught myself how to speak clearly, dress neatly, carry myself with quiet confidence not for others, but to hold myself together, to fake strength until I felt it. When I turned 18, I left the system with nothing but 2 duffel bags and a folder full of acceptance letters. One of them was from a prestigious university across the state, full ride, full housing, everything covered. I remember standing outside the campus gates, looking up at the stone buildings, the ivy-covered walls, the students laughing and walking past me with clean, unmarked faces. I felt small, but I also felt something else. I had made it this far on my own, and I wasn't going to stop now. College was the first time I got to choose my own name, my own identity. I went by Leona Gray. Simple, elegant. The past was still there, but I kept it buried. I told no one where I came from. No one asked. I became the quiet genius, the one professors admired and students envied. But inside, I was still the girl with the mark, no matter how much I tried to bury her. I remember walking past couples holding hands on campus lawns, watching them from a distance, wondering what it felt like to be wanted, to be seen and loved without hesitation. I told myself I didn't need it, but that was a lie I whispered often. Still, I pushed forward. I graduated with honors. I was recruited by a top financial firm before I even walked the stage, and a few years later, I built my own company. I had money. I had power. And finally, I had enough resources to do what I had only dreamed of for years. I flew overseas to one of the most advanced dermatology centers in the world. 3 weeks, 8 treatments, countless needles, lasers, ointments, and pain. But it was worth it. When I looked in the mirror after the final session, I saw something I had never seen before. A face I could recognize. A face I could live with. But not even then did I smile. Because I knew the ones who caused the damage weren't strangers. They were the people who gave me life, and then decided I wasn't worth keeping. And what I didn't know yet was that fate was about to bring them back into my world. Not for a reunion, but for a reckoning. 3 years after I started my company, we were handling asset recovery and private lending for high-net-worth clients and failing businesses alike. I had built a strong team. We were quiet, efficient, and anonymous just the way I liked it. No interviews, no photos, no press releases. I kept my face out of everything. I wasn't hiding anymore, I just didn't need to be seen. Then one Monday morning, while reviewing flagged loan requests from our new AI screening system, a name appeared on the screen that made my stomach twist. Brandon Whitlock. My father. I hadn't spoken that name in nearly 2 decades. I clicked the file. They were applying for a secured loan, a last-ditch effort to keep their home from being seized. The house had been refinanced 3 times, and my father had racked up hundreds of thousands in gambling debt. The only collateral left was the house I once lived in, the house I was thrown out of. I stared at the document in silence. Attached was a recent photo of the property. It was smaller than I remembered, more run down, with chipped paint and rust creeping along the gate. But it was still the same house, same driveway, same front steps where I used to sit and watch the world pass me by, waiting for someone to love me. I could have rejected the request. I could have let the system deny it like it had for others with worse credit and no stability. But something in me hesitated. Not out of guilt, not out of love, but out of something else, a memory, a feeling that no matter what they did, they were still the people who brought me into this world, I couldn't change that. I sat there, frozen between two instincts, justice and grace. And then I made the call. I instructed my lead manager, Marcus, to accept the loan under a shell company we owned. We would offer it at a near zero interest rate, no penalty, generous repayment terms. We would take the house as collateral, as standard, but do nothing to jeopardize them unless they defaulted. In short, I saved them. They didn't know it was me. I didn't want them to. This wasn't about recognition or revenge. Not yet. It was simply a test. Would they prove they had changed? Would they become the kind of people I had spent my entire life wishing they were? Or were they still the same ghosts who left me behind? For months, the payments came in slowly, but on time. Nothing dramatic. I didn't check in. I didn't interfere. I simply let the numbers update in my system and moved on with my life. Until the day fate decided to put us in the same room again. It was a chilly afternoon. I had stepped into a quiet little diner on the edge of town, just looking for coffee between meetings. The place was nearly empty. I chose a corner table, ordered my drink, and pulled out my laptop. That's when I heard the voice. Her voice. My mother. I froze. It was unmistakable, sharp, clipped, always slightly annoyed, like the world was one long inconvenience. I looked up, heart pounding. She was sitting 2 tables away, facing me from an angle, with a younger woman I vaguely recognized. My sister, or half-sister. I didn't know anymore. They hadn't seen me yet. I could have left. I should have. But something in me needed to know. So I sat still and listened. They were talking about their financial struggles, about the stress, about the mortgage. My mother grumbled. We wouldn't even be in this mess if it weren't for that cursed child. Ever since she was born, things started falling apart. She dragged our whole family into the dirt. My sister scoffed. You mean that freak with the face? My mother nodded. People crossed the street just to avoid looking at her. She wasn't normal. We did what we had to do. Then, she laughed. Laughed. As if throwing your own child away was a funny little story to pass around over coffee. And that's when she looked straight at me. Her eyes skimmed past without a hint of recognition. Not even a flicker. I wasn't her daughter anymore. I wasn't even a memory. I was a stranger with a nice coat and a good posture invisible, once again. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. I stood up calmly, placed a $20 bill on the table, and walked out without a word. That evening, I went home, sat at my desk, and drafted a single email to Marcus. Initiate foreclosure proceedings. I watched the cursor blink on the screen as my hand hovered over the mouse. Then I clicked send. And for the first time in years, I smiled. 2 weeks after I sent the email, the wheels began to turn. Our legal team drafted the foreclosure notice. A formal letter was delivered to the Whitlock residence by courier. I had it printed on standard company letterhead. Just like every other case, no special treatment. No hint of who was behind it. They were given 30 days to vacate the property or settle the outstanding debt in full. I knew they couldn't. My father hadn't held a job in 5 years. His name was flagged on every blacklist in the financial system. The only thing he still gambled on was time, and even that was running out. My mother had never worked a day in her life, and my sister, from what I had gathered, was bouncing between part-time jobs and shallow relationships, still trying to marry rich and escape the mess she grew up in. There was no rescue coming. Still, they called the company desperate, pleading. I listened to the recordings. I shouldn't have, but I did. In one call, my mother's voice cracked. We didn't know the interest would balloon like this. There must be a mistake. Please, we'll do anything. Do. Marcus remained calm, professional. Everything is in accordance with the contract, ma'am. But we've made payments, small ones, but still. I'm sorry, the loan has defaulted. We're proceeding with recovery. I could hear the fear building in her breath. It was a strange feeling, hearing the same woman who once left me on a sidewalk now begging to keep her home. And still, she had no idea she was speaking to the child she discarded. 10 days later, the eviction notice was served. Neighbors watched as movers boxed up years of furniture, peeling photos off walls, dragging old chairs across warped hardwood floors. The same front door that once slammed behind me now stood open, exposing the inside to judgment just like it had done to me so many times before. I didn't go there in person. I didn't need to. I saw it all from the security footage our team recorded during the process, something we did with all properties we reclaimed. My father shouted at the movers, tried to block the trucks with his body until police escorted him aside. My mother cried in the driveway, slumped on the curb like the world had betrayed her. My sister cursed the sky, blaming the economy, the banks, the universe, everyone but themselves. Not once did any of them wonder if this was something they might have earned. Not once did they ask, who gave us the loan in the first place, who was kind enough to help? That possibility didn't exist in their world. Gratitude was a language they never spoke. And so the house was emptied. Keys collected. Locks changed. Property seized. It was done. That night, I sat by my apartment window, watching the city lights blink quietly across the skyline. I held a glass of wine in my hand, swirling it slowly, and whispered to no one in particular, "You threw me out first." But the part that haunted me wasn't what I had done. It was that I didn't feel guilt. Not even a little. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't revenge. This was consequence. And yet, it wasn't over. Because there was still one thing left they didn't know. A truth that would change everything. And I was finally ready to tell them. I could have stopped there. Letting them lose the house was already more than they ever imagined I was capable of. But something inside me still wasn't done. Not because I wanted revenge, but because they still didn't know. They still walked around this world believing they were victims, that life had simply been unfair to them, that the universe had cursed them and taken everything away for no reason. No, they needed to know the truth. Not just that I was still alive, but that I had saved them before I took it all back. And so I began to plan. It wasn't about drama or spectacle. I didn't want to make a scene. I just wanted them to see me, really see me for the first time in 2 decades, to realize what they had done and what they had lost. A few days after the foreclosure, I found out my family had applied for assistance through a local outreach charity. They were living in a cheap motel outside the city. Word had started spreading in the community. Old neighbors, old friends, some offered pity, most turned away. I made a quiet phone call to the producer of a popular local podcast, one that specialized in real-life tragedies, family breakdowns, and miracle redemptions. The kind of show desperate people reached out to when they had no other platform. I introduced myself under a pseudonym, told them I had a story they might want to hear. A few weeks later, the producer reached out to the Whitlocks. And they said yes. Of course they did. They thought they'd get sympathy, donations, maybe a GoFundMe boost. They thought the world would mourn for them, for the family who lost everything. The show invited me to be part of the episode. They said, "We think it'd be powerful if we had someone who could speak to the bigger story of abandonment, survival, maybe even forgiveness. You've lived through the foster system. Your perspective would be meaningful. I agreed, but not before I made one request. We would do it face to face. In the studio? Live? The setup was simple. I would appear as a guest from the community with no connection to them, at least. That's what they believed. They had no recent photos of me. My name had been changed legally years ago. I wasn't in any system as Leona Whitlock. I had scrubbed that identity clean. The day of the recording, I walked into the studio wearing a simple black blouse, my hair tied back, makeup minimal, no jewelry, no drama. I wanted them to see the woman, not the mask. They were already seated on set when I arrived: my father, my mother, and my sister. They looked tired, bitter, angry at the world. As I took my seat across from them, just a few feet away, not one of them flinched. Not one of them recognized me. The host began the show with a typical intro. We're here with the Whitlock family, who've experienced a series of devastating setbacks over the last few years. And today, we're exploring the themes of loss, survival, and family reconciliation. They spoke first, told their side. They painted a picture of hardship and misfortune, claimed they were doing the best they could. They didn't mention the gambling, or the cruelty, or the child they abandoned. Until the host asked, "Did you have any other family who might have helped?" My mother shifted in her seat. "We had a daughter once," she said, her voice suddenly cold, "but she was different. She didn't stay with us. We tried our best." Tried. I nearly laughed, but I held it in. Then the host turned to me. "Leona, you've heard their story. As someone who's lived through the foster care system yourself, what do you think?" I looked at them, really looked. Their faces, their eyes. The same people who left me behind like garbage. I took a breath and said softly, "I think sometimes people blame others for the things they don't want to face in themselves. Sometimes they say it was fate, a curse, bad luck. But the truth is, they made a choice." My mother narrowed her eyes, sensing something. My father leaned forward. I continued. They chose to abandon someone who would have loved them. They chose shame over responsibility, silence over truth. My sister stared. "You don't know us," my mother snapped. "You have no idea what we went through." I smiled gently. "Actually, I do." I reached into my bag and placed a faded photograph on the table, one of me as a little girl, curled up on the front porch steps, face half hidden behind a teddy bear, that mark still across my cheek. My mother's hand froze. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. My father stood up. "What kind of sick joke is this?" I looked at all three of them. "My name is Leona Gray now, but 20 years ago, I was the daughter you threw away." And for the first time in my life, they were speechless. Silence. That was the first thing I heard after I dropped the truth. The studio, once filled with sympathetic sighs and dramatic gasps, fell dead quiet. My mother's mouth was still slightly open, but no sound came out. My father had frozen mid-step, his hands clenched into trembling fists. My sister just stared, her face pale and lost, like the bottom had dropped out from beneath her. It was perfect. Not because it hurt them, but because, for the first time in their lives, they were forced to look at me. Not the cursed child, not the mistake, not the ghost of some bad luck they blamed for their failures, but me, the woman, the survivor, the storm they created and now had to face. The host cleared her throat, trying to regain composure. "Well, that certainly changes things. Leona, would you like to say more?" I shook my head. No, I think they've said enough for both of us, for 20 years. Then I stood up and walked off the set. No dramatics, no mic drop, just quiet resolve. The next day, the episode aired raw, unedited, exactly as it happened, and the internet exploded. Comments poured in. I'm shaking. That reveal at the end. Chills. How could a mother abandon a child like that? Leona is a queen. A silent assassin. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just destroyed them with truth. I hope that family never sleeps again. People shared the clip. Millions watched. Dozens of local stations picked it up, calling it the most jaw-dropping moment in podcast history. But I stayed quiet. I didn't respond to interviews. I didn't accept calls. I didn't even read most of the messages sent to my company. Because this wasn't about fame or pity or revenge. This was about accountability. And it was finally happening. Within days, the charity that had sponsored my parents' motel stay withdrew their support. They cited a violation of trust and misrepresentation of facts. The public donations stopped. Journalists started digging, pulling up old financial records, bankruptcy filings, debt trails, even old neighborhood rumors about the child they once had and got rid of. My family was exposed. Not just for abandoning me, but for lying about it for 2 decades. My mother tried to release a statement, blaming mental illness, saying she was young and overwhelmed. My father refused to speak to the press. My sister deleted all her social media and disappeared online. But it didn't stop the wave. They were now the face of generational cruelty, of cowardice, of selfishness. I watched from the sidelines, calm, still, unbothered. They tried to reach out, of course. First through a lawyer, then a distant cousin, then directly, emails, letters, a voicemail where my mother sobbed, "Please, just let us explain. We didn't know. We were scared. You've made your point. Just talk to us." But I didn't respond. I had no more words for them. Because what they wanted wasn't forgiveness. They wanted closure. And that they didn't deserve. Closure is earned. And they walked away from that possibility the moment they left a 5-year-old girl on a sidewalk and never looked back. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't vengeful. I was simply done. Let the world judge them. Let them sit in the silence they once forced upon me. Let them finally understand what it feels like to be forgotten. It was a gray afternoon, a month after the episode aired. I had just finished a client meeting and was walking through the park near my office when I saw them sitting on a bench. All 3 of them. My mother, my father, my sister. They looked different. Smaller. Older. Like time had finally caught up and pressed its weight on their backs. There were dark circles under their eyes. Their clothes no longer crisp or curated. My sister's nails were chipped. My father's hands trembled. And my mother, once always perfectly coiffed, now looked like a woman who hadn't slept in weeks. They didn't see me at first. But when I stopped a few feet away, they all looked up. It took a moment, a breath, a beat of recognition. And then silence. My mother stood first. Her voice broke on the first word. "Leona?" I didn't answer. She stepped forward. "Please, just listen." "I've heard enough," I said quietly. She winced. "We were wrong. All of it. I see it now. I I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know. I hated myself every day after we left you. I told myself you were better off, that it was for the best. But I was lying. To myself. To everyone." Tears welled up in her eyes, but mine remained dry. My father finally spoke. His voice was hoarse. I was scared. I didn't know how to be a father to someone different. That's not an excuse, but it's the truth. I turned to him slowly. You were never scared. You were ashamed. He flinched. My sister didn't speak at all, just stared, hollow and still, as if trying to undo everything with one long, regretful gaze. I took a deep breath, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I wanted to make sure my voice was steady, unshaken. I spent my entire childhood trying to figure out what I did wrong. I said, why I wasn't enough. Why a birthmark could make a mother abandon her daughter. Why being born into the wrong moment meant I didn't deserve love. My mother tried to reach for my hand. I pulled it back. I gave you a second chance, I said, and you used it to insult me one more time. My father stepped forward, voice cracking. We were broken. We're trying to fix it now. It's too late. I paused, let that truth sit in the air between us. Then I looked them all in the eyes one by one and said, I'm not angry anymore. I'm not here to scream or punish. I just want you to feel what I felt when you left me on that sidewalk. And when you lie awake at night, wondering what you lost, I hope the silence answers you. My mother broke down, falling to the bench, sobbing. My sister turned her face away. My father looked at me like he'd seen a ghost. But I wasn't a ghost. I was very much alive. And I was walking away not just from them, but from everything they once had power over. I didn't turn around. Not when they cried. Not when they called my name. Not when they begged. Because some things don't need a sequel. They just need an ending. People always say time heals all wounds. But I don't believe that. Time doesn't heal. Time hides. It buries pain under layers of busyness, distraction, noise. But deep down, the scar is still there, waiting, remembering. I used to think my story would end with forgiveness, that one day I'd stand in front of them and say, it's okay, I understand. That I would cry, they would cry, and the world would feel right again. But the truth is, not every story needs that kind of ending. Some stories don't need closure. They need consequences. And in the end, I didn't need them to apologize. I needed them to see what they'd thrown away. A little girl who wanted nothing more than to be loved, to be held, to be told she wasn't a mistake. They never gave her that. So I gave it to myself. Through hard work, through pain, through silence, through success. I became everything they said I could never be, not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. I look in the mirror now and I don't see a curse. I see clarity. I see a face that fought to be here. A life built from nothing, except the refusal to stay broken. And to anyone who's ever been cast aside, called ugly, unwanted, cursed, hear me now. You are not your scars. You are not what they said about you. You are what you choose to become after they stop looking. And if you're still standing, that's not survival. That's power. If this story moved you, if you believe that silence can become strength, that pain can become purpose, then subscribe to our channel. Because out there, someone else is still waiting to hear that they matter. And maybe they'll hear it here first.